Welcome to Champion Stories. If this is your first time here, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And now, on to today's story. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training facility in General Santos City as Manny Pacquiao wrapped his hands with the same methodical precision that had defined his legendary career. The rhythmic sound of leather meeting heavy bag echoed through the empty gym, but his mind wandered far from the familiar routine. News of the chaotic brawl between the teams of Acilino Popo Freitas and Wanderlei Silva at the Spartan Fight Night 2 had reached him through social media feeds and concerned messages from fellow fighters worldwide. Manny paused mid-combination, his weathered hands still raised in fighting stance. The images from São Paulo haunted him, grown men throwing punches outside the ring, security struggling to restore order, and the disappointed faces of fans who had come to witness sporty, not street violence. This wasn't the boxing he had dedicated his life to promoting. This wasn't the martial arts philosophy that had lifted him from poverty in Kibawe to global stardom. The Filipino champion lowered his gloves and walked toward the corner where his phone buzzed incessantly. Messages poured in from promoters, journalists, and fellow athletes, all seeking his perspective on the Brazilian incident. Some wanted inflammatory quotes for headlines. Others hoped he would distance himself from the controversy entirely. But Manny felt something deeper stirring within his chest, a responsibility that transcended business interests or public relations strategies. He remembered his own heated moments in the ring, the times when emotions had threatened to overwhelm discipline. The difference was that he had learned early in his career that true strength came not from unleashing fury, but from controlling it. His mother Dionysia had taught him that anger was like fire, useful when contained and directed, destructive when allowed to spread wildly. Manny's trainer approached cautiously, recognizing the contemplative expression that usually preceded important decisions. The older man had witnessed this look before major fights, before political campaigns, before charitable missions that would take the champion away from training for weeks. It was the look of a man weighing his moral obligations against personal convenience. The gymnasium fell silent, except for the distant hum of air conditioning and the occasional car passing on the street outside. Manny sat on the edge of the ring apron, his legs dangling like a child's, and closed his eyes. In his mind, he could see the faces of young fighters around the world who looked up to veterans like Popó and Wanderlei. What message had that brawl sent to aspiring boxers and mixed martial artists? What example had been set for the next generation? His phone rang, interrupting his meditation. The caller ID showed his longtime friend and advisor, someone who had guided him through countless career decisions. The conversation was brief but decisive. Within minutes, Manny was scrolling through flight schedules to São Paulo, his mind already formulating a plan that would require delicate diplomacy and genuine courage. The decision crystallized as he watched training footage of both Popo and Wanderlei from earlier in their careers. These were not inherently violent men. They were athletes who had dedicated their lives to perfecting their crafts, who had inspired millions through their dedication and skill. Something had gone wrong in São Paulo, something that reduced seasoned professionals to brawling like untrained street fighters. Manny understood that his intervention might be unwelcome. Neither Popo nor Wanderlei had requested his involvement, and his presence could be interpreted as grandstanding or opportunistic publicity-seeking. But the 8-division world champion had learned long ago that doing what was right often meant accepting misunderstanding and criticism. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the gym floor, Manny made the calls that would change his schedule for the following week. Flights were booked, meetings were rearranged, and training sessions were postponed. His wife Jinky expressed concern about the sudden trip, but she recognized the determined set of his jaw that indicated his mind was made up. The champion, who had once been called the fighting pride of the Philippines, was about to embark on a different kind of fight, one that would require not his fists, but his heart, his wisdom, and his unwavering belief that even the deepest conflicts could be resolved through understanding and mutual respect. The Emirates flight from Manila to São Paulo stretched endlessly before Manny as he settled into his seat, declining the flight attendant's offer of champagne. His carry-on bag contained not the usual fight preparation materials, but rather carefully researched notes about both Popo and Wanderlei's careers, their recent struggles, and the circumstances that had led to the explosive confrontation. He had spent the previous evening studying footage of the incident, frame by frame, trying to understand the precise moment when professional competition had devolved into personal animosity. During the layover in Dubai, Manny found himself in the airport chapel, a small interfaith space where travelers of all backgrounds sought moments of reflection. He knelt quietly, not praying for success in his mission, but rather for wisdom to know when to speak and when to listen. The weight of his decision pressed heavily on his shoulders. He was inserting himself into a conflict between two proud fighters who might view his intervention as unwanted interference from an outsider. The second leg of the journey provided time for deeper contemplation. Manny reviewed what he knew about Acilino Popó Freitas, a former super featherweight and lightweight champion whose explosive style and charismatic personality had made him a beloved figure in Brazilian boxing. Popo's journey from poverty in Salvador to championship glory resonated deeply with Manny's own story of rising from the streets of General Santos City. Both men understood the hunger that drove fighters from disadvantaged backgrounds to risk everything for a chance at greatness. Wanderlei Silva's story carried different but equally compelling themes. The former Pride Fighting Championship star had built his reputation on relentless aggression and an intimidating presence that earned him the nickname the Axe Murderer. Yet Manny knew that behind the fierce exterior lay a man who had dedicated his life to martial arts philosophy and had mentored countless young fighters throughout his career. The contradiction between Wanderlei's public persona and his private character intrigued Manny, who had often struggled with similar dichotomies in his own life. As the plane descended toward Guarulhos International Airport, Manny reflected on the cultural challenges he would face. Brazil's fighting culture differed significantly from the Philippines' approach to combat sports. Where Filipino fighters often emphasized technical precision and strategic patience, Brazilian athletes were known for their emotional intensity and passionate expression. The very qualities that made Brazilian fighters exciting to watch might have contributed to the escalation of tensions between the two camps. The humid São Paulo air hit Manny like a wall as he exited the airport terminal. His arrival had been kept deliberately low-key. No media announcements, no promotional fanfare, just a simple rental car and a modest hotel reservation in the city center. He wanted to approach both fighters as a peer and potential mediator, not as a celebrity making a grand gesture for public consumption. During the drive through São Paulo's sprawling urban landscape, Manny was struck by the similarities between this Brazilian metropolis and Manila. The same mixture of gleaming skyscrapers and humble neighborhoods, the same energy of people striving to improve their circumstances, the same underlying passion that characterized both cultures. He began to understand that the conflict between Popó and Wanderlei might reflect deeper tensions within Brazilian society itself: the pressure to succeed, the fear of losing respect, the difficulty of maintaining dignity in an increasingly commercialized sport. His hotel room overlooked a busy avenue where late-night traffic created a constant urban symphony. Manny stood at the window, watching the city's rhythm and planning his approach. He had learned from his political career that successful mediation required understanding each party's underlying needs, not just their stated positions. Both Popó and Wanderlei were veteran fighters nearing the end of their careers, men who had sacrificed their bodies and youth for the sport they loved. The brawl might have been less about personal animosity and more about the frustration of aging warriors struggling to maintain relevance in a young man's game. Before retiring for the night, Manny sent carefully worded messages to representatives of both fighters, requesting private meetings without specifying his intentions. The responses would determine whether his mission of reconciliation could even begin, or whether he would return to the Philippines having learned a valuable lesson about the limits of good intentions. The morning brought unexpected rain to São Paulo, transforming the bustling streets into a symphony of splashing tires and hurried footsteps. Manny stood in his hotel lobby, adjusting his simple polo shirt and checking his phone for the third time. Popó's team had responded first, agreeing to meet at a traditional Brazilian steakhouse in Vila Madalena, a neighborhood known for its artistic community and relaxed atmosphere. The choice of venue suggested openness to dialogue, though Manny remained cautious about reading too much into such details. The taxi ride through São Paulo's maze-like streets provided Manny with glimpses of Brazilian life that reminded him of his own humble beginnings. Street vendors hawked their wares despite the rain. Children played soccer in narrow alleys, and elderly residents gathered under covered walkways to escape the weather while maintaining their social connections. The resilience and community spirit, he observed, reinforced his belief that the conflict between the two fighters was an aberration, not a reflection of their true characters. Arriving at the restaurant 30 minutes early, Manny chose a corner table that offered privacy while allowing him to observe the entrance. The establishment's warm wooden interior and the aroma of grilled meat created an atmosphere more conducive to conversation than confrontation. He ordered only coffee, his stomach too knotted with nervous energy to consider food. This meeting would set the tone for everything that followed, and he understood that one misstep could derail his entire mission. Popó arrived precisely on time, accompanied by 2 members of his training team. The former champion's entrance commanded attention even in civilian clothes. His confident stride and alert eyes scanning the room revealed the instincts of a man who had spent decades preparing for potential threats. Yet when his gaze settled on Manny, the Brazilian's expression softened with what appeared to be genuine surprise and curiosity rather than suspicion or hostility. The initial moments of their encounter unfolded with careful formality. Popó's team members positioned themselves at a nearby table, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough to allow private conversation. Manny appreciated this gesture of trust, recognizing it as a sign that Popó was willing to engage seriously with his unexpected visitor. The Brazilian fighter's body language gradually relaxed as they exchanged pleasantries about their respective careers and shared experiences in the ring. As their conversation deepened, Manny began to understand the complex emotions that had contributed to the recent incident. Popó's frustration was evident, not just with Wanderlei, but with the entire situation that had spiraled beyond his control. The veteran fighter spoke with the weariness of a man who had dedicated his life to a sport that increasingly seemed to value spectacle over substance, controversy over character. His hands moved expressively as he described the pressure from promoters, the expectations of fans, and the difficulty of maintaining dignity while participating in events that sometimes felt more like entertainment than athletic competition. The rain outside intensified, creating a cocoon of intimacy within the restaurant. Manny found himself sharing his own struggles with similar pressures, the challenges of balancing personal integrity with professional obligations, and the weight of representing not just himself, but his entire country every time he stepped into the ring. The parallel experiences created an unexpected bond between the two champions, both of whom had risen from poverty to achieve international recognition while trying to remain true to their values. Popó's demeanor shifted noticeably as he began to speak about Wanderlei with less anger and more sadness. The Brazilian revealed that he and Wanderlei had once been friends, training partners who had supported each other through difficult periods in their careers. The transformation of that friendship into bitter rivalry had been gradual and painful, fueled by misunderstandings, competitive pressure, and the influence of people who benefited from conflict between the two fighters. By the time their meeting concluded, Manny sensed that Popó was genuinely interested in finding a path toward reconciliation, though pride and public perception remained significant obstacles. The following afternoon found Manny navigating the industrial outskirts of São Paulo, where Wanderlei Silva's training facility occupied a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that bore the scars of urban decay and economic struggle. The contrast with the previous day's upscale restaurant meeting was stark and intentional. Wanderlei had chosen to meet on his own territory, surrounded by the familiar sounds of heavy bags being pummeled and the metallic clang of weights hitting concrete floors. Manny arrived to find the gym buzzing with activity despite the late hour. Young fighters moved through their routines with the desperate intensity of athletes who viewed combat sports as their only escape from poverty. The scene transported him back to his own early days in General Santos City, when every training session felt like a matter of survival rather than sport. He understood immediately why Wanderlei had chosen this setting. It was a reminder of what fighting truly meant to those who had no other options. The former Pride champion emerged from a back office wearing simple training gear, his legendary intimidating presence somehow diminished by the weight of recent events. Wanderlei's famous intensity remained, but it was now tempered by something that looked remarkably like exhaustion. The man who had once struck fear into opponents with his pre-fight stare now carried himself with the careful movements of someone nursing both physical and emotional wounds. Their initial interaction unfolded in the center of the training floor, surrounded by the controlled chaos of fighters preparing for upcoming bouts. Wanderlei's team maintained a respectful distance, but their protective positioning around their leader was unmistakable. Manny recognized the loyalty that Wanderlei inspired in his students and training partners, the same fierce devotion that had probably contributed to the escalation of the recent conflict. As they moved to a quieter corner of the facility, Manny observed the subtle signs of Wanderlei's internal struggle. The Brazilian's hands, scarred from decades of combat, trembled slightly when he thought no one was watching. His eyes, once blazing with competitive fire, now reflected the complex emotions of a warrior grappling with the twilight of his career. The incident with Popó's team had clearly affected him more deeply than his public statements suggested. Wanderlei's version of events revealed layers of frustration that extended far beyond his rivalry with Popó. The former champion spoke with bitter eloquence about the commercialization of combat sports, the way promoters manipulated personal relationships to generate controversy and ticket sales. His anger was not just directed at Popó, but at an entire system that seemed to reward conflict over sportsmanship, spectacle over skill. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Wanderlei began discussing his role as a mentor to young fighters. His voice softened as he described the responsibility he felt toward the dozens of athletes who looked to him for guidance and inspiration. The recent brawl had forced him to confront the possibility that his actions might have sent the wrong message to impressionable students who viewed him as a role model. Manny found himself deeply moved by Wanderlei's vulnerability. Behind the fearsome exterior that had made him one of mixed martial arts' most recognizable figures was a man genuinely concerned about his legacy and the impact of his choices on others. The Brazilian's admission that he had lost control during the incident with Popó's team revealed a level of self-awareness that surprised and encouraged the Filipino champion. As their meeting progressed, Wanderlei's defensive posture gradually gave way to something approaching openness. He spoke about his friendship with Popó in earlier years, before competitive pressures and outside influences had poisoned their relationship. The pain in his voice when describing the deterioration of that bond was unmistakable, suggesting that the recent violence had been as much about grief over a lost friendship as about any specific grievance. The training session around them continued unabated, young fighters pursuing their dreams with the same passion that had once driven both Wanderlei and Popó to championship glory. The third day of Manny's mission dawned with crystalline clarity. The previous days, rain having washed São Paulo's air clean and revealed the city's sprawling beauty in sharp detail. He spent the morning in his hotel room, carefully reviewing notes from both meetings and formulating an approach that might bridge the seemingly insurmountable gap between two proud fighters. The challenge was not simply resolving their personal conflict, but addressing the deeper issues that had allowed their rivalry to escalate into public violence. Manny's phone buzzed with messages from his team back in the Philippines, reminding him of upcoming training commitments and promotional obligations. The outside world continued its relentless pace, but he found himself increasingly absorbed in the delicate work of peacemaking. His wife Jinky had sent encouraging texts, along with photos of their children that reminded him why this mission mattered beyond the immediate participants. The afternoon brought an unexpected development when both camps agreed to a joint meeting at a neutral location, a small community center in a working-class neighborhood where neither fighter had particular ties or advantages. The venue's modest basketball court and folding chairs created an atmosphere of equality that expensive restaurants or private gyms could not provide. Manny arrived early to ensure the space was arranged in a way that would minimize confrontational dynamics. Popó's team entered first, their body language cautious but not hostile. The former champion himself appeared more relaxed than during their initial meeting, suggesting that their previous conversation had continued to resonate with him. His training partners positioned themselves along one wall, maintaining protective proximity while avoiding aggressive posturing that might escalate tensions. Wanderlei's arrival 15 minutes later created a palpable shift in the room's energy. The former Pride champion's legendary intensity was carefully controlled, but his presence still commanded attention from everyone present. His students and training partners filed in behind him, their loyalty evident in the way they unconsciously mirrored their mentor's movements and positioning. The initial moments of the joint meeting unfolded with careful formality, both camps maintaining respectful distance, while assessing the other's intentions. Manny positioned himself between the two groups, not as a referee or judge, but as a facilitator who understood the pressures and motivations that drove elite fighters. His presence seemed to create a buffer zone that allowed both sides to observe each other without the immediate threat of confrontation. As the conversation developed, subtle changes in body language revealed the complex emotions underlying the surface tension. Popo's occasional glances toward Wanderlei carried traces of the respect that had once characterized their relationship. Wanderlei's rigid posture gradually softened as he listened to perspectives that challenged his assumptions about his former friend's motivations. The breakthrough moment came when both fighters began discussing their shared concerns about the direction of combat sports. Their parallel frustrations with promotional manipulation, media sensationalism, and the pressure to manufacture controversy created unexpected common ground. The realization that they had both been struggling with similar challenges seemed to shift their focus from personal grievances to systemic problems that affected all veteran fighters. Manny observed the gradual transformation with quiet satisfaction, recognizing the signs of genuine communication beginning to replace defensive posturing. The two camps remained physically separated, but the invisible barriers between them were slowly dissolving as shared experiences and mutual respect reasserted themselves over recent animosity. The community center's simple environment seemed to strip away the artificial elements that had contributed to their conflict, revealing the fundamental humanity that both fighters shared beneath their public personas. The fourth evening found the three champions seated around a simple wooden table in the community center's kitchen, sharing a modest meal prepared by local volunteers who had quietly supported Manny's peace initiative. The informal setting had stripped away the last vestiges of ceremonial distance, allowing genuine conversation to flow between men who had spent their careers communicating primarily through violence and competition. Wanderlei's hands, scarred from countless battles, moved slowly as he described the moment he realized the brawl had spiraled beyond his control. The former Pride champion's voice carried the weight of genuine regret as he recounted watching his students and training partners engage in the kind of undisciplined violence he had spent years teaching them to avoid. The contradiction between his role as a mentor and his failure to prevent the incident had clearly haunted him since that chaotic night at the Spartan Fight Night event. Popo listened with an expression that gradually shifted from defensive skepticism to something approaching understanding. The Brazilian boxer's own recollection of the incident revealed similar feelings of responsibility and disappointment. He spoke about the pressure he had felt to maintain his reputation as a fierce competitor, even as his body and reflexes reminded him daily that his prime fighting years were behind him. The brawl had represented everything he had tried to avoid throughout his career, meaningless violence that served no purpose beyond satisfying the bloodlust of spectators. Manny found himself serving as both mediator and confessor, as both fighters revealed vulnerabilities they had never shared publicly. The Filipino champion's own experiences with the burden of representation, carrying the hopes and expectations of an entire nation into every fight, created a foundation of empathy that allowed him to understand the unique pressures faced by elite athletes from developing countries. The conversation took an unexpected turn when both fighters began discussing their fears about retirement and relevance. Wanderlei's admission that he sometimes felt forgotten by younger fans who had never witnessed his legendary Pride performances resonated deeply with Popo's own struggles to maintain his place in a sport increasingly dominated by social media personalities and manufactured controversies. The realization that they were both fighting the same battle against time and irrelevance created a bond that transcended their recent animosity. As the evening progressed, the two former rivals began sharing stories from their respective careers that revealed striking parallels in their journeys. Both had risen from poverty through dedication and sacrifice. Both had experienced the intoxicating heights of championship glory, and both now faced the difficult transition from active competition to elder statesmanship within their sport. The similarities in their experiences seemed to surprise them, as if they were discovering aspects of themselves reflected in their former enemy. The community center's simple environment continued to work its magic, creating space for honest reflection that would have been impossible in more formal settings. Local children occasionally peered through windows, their faces pressed against the glass, as they watched three legendary fighters engaged in the kind of peaceful dialogue that seemed to contradict everything they thought they knew about combat sports. Manny observed the gradual transformation with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that the healing process had moved beyond simple conflict resolution into something approaching genuine friendship. The two Brazilian champions were rediscovering the mutual respect that had once characterized their relationship, while simultaneously finding new purpose in their shared commitment to mentoring the next generation of fighters. The evening concluded with both men acknowledging that their recent conflict had been as much about their own insecurities and fears as about any specific grievances between them. The fifth day brought an unprecedented gesture that would forever change the narrative surrounding the São Paulo incident. Wanderlei arrived at the community center, carrying a worn leather bag containing gloves from his most significant victories, while Popó brought championship belts that had defined the pinnacle of his boxing career. The symbolic weight of these artifacts was not lost on anyone present. These were the physical manifestations of dreams achieved through decades of sacrifice and dedication. Manny watched with profound respect as both fighters began arranging their memorabilia on the simple wooden table that had hosted their previous conversations. The ritual unfolded without predetermined structure, yet it carried the solemnity of a ceremony that acknowledged both the glory and the cost of their respective journeys. Each piece of equipment told a story of triumph over adversity, of moments when skill and determination had overcome seemingly impossible odds. The transformation in both men's demeanor was remarkable to witness. Wanderlei's legendary intensity had evolved into something approaching serenity, as he handled gloves that had carried him through battles in Pride's most iconic venues. His fingers traced the worn leather with the reverence of a craftsman, examining tools that had served him faithfully throughout his career. The violence these gloves had witnessed was now overshadowed by the artistry and dedication they represented. Popó's interaction with his championship belts revealed similar depths of emotion and reflection. The former champion's hands moved with careful precision as he polished gold plates that had once seemed like the most important objects in the world. His expression suggested he was seeing these symbols of achievement through new eyes, recognizing them not just as personal accomplishments, but as responsibilities to inspire and guide others who shared similar dreams. The presence of their respective teams added another layer of significance to the proceedings. Young fighters from both camps observed the ceremony with wide-eyed attention, understanding instinctively that they were witnessing something far more important than a simple reconciliation between former rivals. The lesson being demonstrated transcended the specific conflict between Popo and Wanderlei. It was about the possibility of transformation, the power of humility, and the importance of choosing growth over grudges. Manny found himself deeply moved by the authenticity of the moment. His own career had been filled with ceremonial occasions, championship celebrations, political rallies, charitable events, but few had carried the genuine emotional weight of this simple gathering in a modest community center. The absence of cameras and media attention seemed to amplify rather than diminish the significance of what was occurring. The afternoon brought an unexpected development when both fighters began discussing plans for a joint training camp that would bring their respective teams together. The idea had emerged organically from their conversations about mentorship and legacy, but it represented a radical departure from the competitive isolation that had characterized their recent relationship. The prospect of former enemies working together to develop the next generation of fighters carried symbolic power that extended far beyond the immediate participants. As the day progressed, the two camps began intermingling in ways that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. Training partners who had been prepared to fight each other were now sharing techniques and experiences, discovering that their supposed enemies possessed knowledge and insights that could enhance their own development. The artificial barriers that had separated the groups were dissolving as shared passion for their craft overcame manufactured animosity. The community center's modest facilities became the backdrop for impromptu training sessions that blended boxing and mixed martial arts techniques in ways that honored both disciplines. Wanderlei's students learned footwork patterns from Popo's boxers, while the boxing team gained new perspectives on grappling and ground fighting from the MMA practitioners. The cross-pollination of knowledge created an atmosphere of mutual learning that seemed to energize everyone involved. By evening, the transformation was complete. Former enemies had become collaborators in a shared mission to elevate their sport and inspire the next generation of fighters. The final morning of Manny's mission dawned with golden sunlight streaming through the community center's windows, illuminating a scene that would have seemed impossible just 1 week earlier. Popo and Wanderlei stood side by side, their hands clasped in a gesture of reconciliation that photographers would later capture for posterity. Though the moment's true significance transcended any media coverage it might receive, the joint press conference that followed was unlike anything the combat sports world had witnessed. Instead of the typical promotional bluster and manufactured animosity, the two Brazilian champions spoke with genuine emotion about their journey from conflict to collaboration. Their words carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom, acknowledging their mistakes while committing to a different path forward that would honor their sport's highest ideals. Manny observed from the sidelines, his mission accomplished but his involvement deliberately understated. The Filipino champion understood that the lasting impact of this reconciliation would depend on Popó and Wanderlei owning their transformation completely, without external credit or interference. His role had been that of a catalyst, creating conditions for healing that the two fighters had ultimately achieved through their own courage and commitment to growth. The announcement of their joint training academy sent shockwaves through the Brazilian combat sports community. The facility would combine boxing and mixed martial arts instruction under one roof, with both champions serving as head instructors who would share their decades of experience with the next generation. The symbolism was powerful, former enemies working together to build something greater than either could achieve alone. Young fighters from both camps embraced the new arrangement with enthusiasm that surprised even their mentors. The artificial divisions that had separated them dissolved as they discovered shared dreams and mutual respect for each other's dedication. Training sessions became collaborative efforts where boxers learned grappling techniques, while MMA fighters refined their striking fundamentals, creating a new generation of more complete martial artists. The ripple effects of the reconciliation extended far beyond the immediate participants. Other veteran fighters who had been trapped in manufactured rivalries began reaching out to former opponents, inspired by the example set in São Paulo. Promoters found themselves under pressure to emphasize sportsmanship over sensationalism, as fans responded positively to the authentic emotion displayed by Popo and Wanderlei. Manny's departure from Brazil was marked by a private ceremony at the community center, where both champions presented him with a specially commissioned plaque recognizing his role as a peacemaker. The inscription, written in Portuguese, English, and Tagalog, acknowledged his contribution to healing not just their personal conflict, but the broader culture of their sport. The flight back to Manila provided time for reflection on the week's extraordinary events. Manny understood that his intervention had succeeded not because of any special wisdom or diplomatic skill, but because he had created space for two good men to rediscover their better angels. The transformation he had witnessed reminded him why he had fallen in love with combat sports in the first place, not for the violence or spectacle, but for the character and resilience that emerged when human beings pushed themselves beyond their perceived limitations. Months later, videos of training sessions at the Popó Wanderlei Academy would go viral on social media, showing former rivals working together with their students in an atmosphere of mutual respect and shared purpose. The facility became a pilgrimage site for fighters from around the world who wanted to train in an environment that prioritized character development alongside technical skill. The legacy of that week in São Paulo would endure long after the headlines faded, proving that even the deepest conflicts could be transformed through courage, humility, and the willingness to choose understanding over animosity. Thank you for watching another episode of Champion Stories. If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming inspiring tales about Manny Pacquiao. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and many times your ideas inspire our next episode. See you next time.